what I found myself thinking this last week is kind of this idea of limitedness. And because disability comes with so much prejudice or assumption that it is exactly that. Whereas is actually, if you more, one of the things I was thinking, should I rather say, is that if you look at it as an idea of limitedness, one of the things that's so beautiful, if you read, I mean, you can pretty much pick up any story in the Bible. God, Jesus, thrives in limitedness. It's like that thing of weakness, or where you, at the end of your humanness, is almost like where God comes in, you know?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Unlocking Hope podcast. Today, we are touching on a topic that I think is very close to most parents' hearts. And it's quite a sensitive topic. It's quite, I think, open to debate and really down to your own beliefs. But we kind of touching on, did God create me like this, my son, my daughter with this disability or neurodivergence? And actually, what does that mean for us as parents and our communities going forward? And been doing a bit of reading, and I have Luke, who's here with me today, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, okay, so my name's Luke. Trying to think what's relevant information. So currently, I work at a church. I'm on sort of pastoral staff there. Lots of work also with young adults. Also work for an NPO that runs through that. That's got to do with education.
Awesome.
Prior to that, I'm trying to think. Grew up in a ministry family.
Yeah.
And then kind of found my way. I started off studying jazz. Didn't enjoy that. And then I landed up doing cultural studies and sort of a lot of anthropological kind of stuff in that as well. And then I ended up kind of spending a lot of time, almost wrote a few things for like the homelessness discourse, kind of a lot of thoughts around that, and then got into documentary making, traveled a lot.
Through Africa,
lots of that. And then actually on some travels, just radically encountered God.
Amazing.
Came back to Durban, COVID, started working at a church, and haven't looked back, I suppose.
It's amazing. Well, I'm really excited to have you here. I know what we're going to chat about is kind of, it, like I said, it's a sensitive thing, but I just wanted to caveat and say that these are our thoughts. I don't think there's any right or wrong way to think about this other than God being the center of it all. But we've been chatting a little bit about it, and I'd love to hear, you've been reading?
A little bit.
What has popped up for you? What has kind of been highlighted as you've been preparing for today?
Sure, I'm trying to think lots. To be honest, I think a lot of, like, on one level, side trails almost, but one of the, obviously that the main thing being, and just so happened even this Sunday at church, we happened to listen to a preach on that Psalm 139, just that idea of fearfully and wonderfully made.
Yeah.
And sort of that whole idea of intricately woven, spent time on detail. And of course that up against this idea of like, how is that belief challenged when something is not how we would have expected, or not exactly to the norm, or whatever those things were. And I suppose in a weird way, even just reading odds and ends, realizing like the world so favors general kind of things, and as soon as minority groups are included, you're kind of in this interesting thing where you realize so much of it, almost like your naive, maybe oblivious things are challenged, like your prejudice, just because like 98% of the world or whatever it would be leans that way, or so I think more than anything probably challenged as I've been thinking about it. That's probably been my biggest emotion.
I think for me as well, because I had always had this thought that God didn't create Ollie with his Down syndrome. It was a result of the original sin and the fall. But the more I go into it, the more this kind of idea is around that kind of diminishes his experience of God and God's ability to work through him. And so I don't know where I'm landing, actually, whether it is that God is implicit in the creation of him with the Down syndrome, or it is a result of have you landed anywhere?
No, but let me throw something into that idea. I thought to myself, like, and obviously I very much personalize this in terms of you and your family and Ollie,
of course,
and everything like that. And one of the thoughts that did come across my mind is like, well, what will heavenly Ollie be like? Like, so much of the scriptures is written about this idea of sort of like your these heavenly bodies, talks about like longing to take off your earthly body for this heavenly body. And in my head, I'm thinking like, well, what is heavenly Ollie like?
Yeah.
And that's for anyone with anything, like what does actually that mean, know?
That is a very good way of thinking of it. So like if I go back and Gary, my husband, and I were talking about it the other day, and we were talking about the Garden of Eden, and we were talking about how Adam and Eve used to walk around naked before, the whole biting the apple thing. And my husband came up with this idea of Ollie often has no social qualms, basically. Like, he doesn't really mind. He says what's on his heart. He does what's on his heart. And that often means that, like, he will wander around without a lot of clothes on. And so Gary was like, well, I wonder if Adam and Eve were more like Ollie.
Like in the purity to that.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. And so we kind of going in this big circle of going, I think where I've landed, and this is a 12-year journey, which has been sped up over the last, I think it was 2-3 weeks ago when we chatted, is it's less about whether God did or didn't create Ollie like this, and more, what does that mean for Ollie in the church situation and, going forward. It's like, he experiences God in a different way. He experiences life in a different way. But more than that, I think God can do amazing things through him that he maybe couldn't do through you or through me.
100%. Like, it's so funny that you said that, because even the other day I was thinking about it during worship, and it's actually happened more than once, where it's like, Ollie's come and he's held my hand or something, and like I've just felt like the presence of God so tangibly, and I'm like, what is it about Ollie that there's something like he's so like in tune with the Holy Spirit that actually just his presence comes with the presence of God, and he's doing nothing, he's just going about this he's just going about it, and he comes and he holds your hands, and he's like, I mean, it happened to me more so the other week than most times. That actually, like, I almost felt like I was holding hands with a spiritual being, and like the manifest presence of God was so tangible in me. And I mean, I knew it was Ollie because he often will come and hold your hand during worship, but like in my head I was just like, this is profound, and I mean, that's not any paper or anything, but it was after you had asked me to come on the podcast, and even in that I was thinking like, God, you're showing me something here, that like, just the tangibleness of that, and I think I said to you the other week when we were chatting, even just that idea of like one or two of the most accurate prophetic words I've ever received are from people with disabilities and like mental disabilities, not just like physical disabilities. So I mean, that to me is quite profound,
I think so. I think in my reading over the last week, what I've really been challenged with is reading articles and listening to talks around how if we are thinking about only ordinary people being created in the image of God, how that demeans people like Ollie's experience of God, because that's basically saying that he's not then created in the image of God. And if we are talking about these experiences that we have with him, then it challenges me to think of, actually, he is created in the image of God, and God is doing these beautiful things through him. And we were talking about Moses just before we started recording, and like, God uses people with, disabilities or differences all the time. And so again, I settle back down to this thing of, am I focusing in the right area when I ask God, did you create him like this or not? And that's, I don't know, that's where I've kind of landed in all of it.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, I suppose, again, and this comes back to that thing of like, where do you fall in that sort of line? And I suppose a big question I've had is that a very similar thing of it is like you have to feel that way, you have to fall in line with the idea that you believe there is a brokenness to Ollie's condition to lean that way. And I think like when we first chatted, you were saying like your uncertainty of that. Yeah. And then I was saying, but at the same time, it's also, it's not like this thing of like, I think one of my questions was too, well, out of interest, have you ever felt the need to pray for Ollie for like a sense of healing as you would maybe a physical disability or...
Yeah. And that was, I think, like I said to you then, being asked that by a few people over our journey, which is, it's such an interesting one because I've never felt prompted to pray for healing from the Down syndrome, like I said, because I've never felt like it was something he needed to be healed from. We've prayed for associated conditions like heart conditions or endocrinology stuff, or he used to get really bad chest infections when he was little, and we used to pray for all of that. But never once have I felt God prompting me to go pray for him to be healed of this Down syndrome. I feel like that would be taking away a critical part of his experience of life and who he is. But that again takes us to then the heavenly body thing and like, how is he going to be when he gets there? Because it's a conundrum, I think. And I don't think there is an easy way of saying that God did or didn't create. I think for me, as the podcast is called Unlocking Hope, like I would love parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, friends, church workers to walk away with a sense of hope and in looking at people with neurodivergence or disabilities and going, they don't need to be a recipient of our love, but they can be an active participant in giving love in the community.
Yeah, that's beautiful, yeah.
That, I think, is where I landed, and that is a direct reference to my brother-in-law's book that is coming out soon. So I'm just going to give him the credits. Thanks, Ben.
I think one of the things is I was almost thinking is like, and just as you've been talking, you reminded me of it, but I think what I found myself thinking this last week is kind of this idea of limitedness. And because disability comes with so much prejudice or assumption that it is exactly that. Whereas is actually, if you more, one of the things I was thinking, should I rather say, is that if you look at it as an idea of limitedness, one of the things that's so beautiful, if you read, I mean, you can pretty much pick up any story in the Bible. God, Jesus, thrives in limitedness. It's like that thing of weakness, or where you, at the end of your humanness, is almost like where God comes in, you know? Yeah. And that's pretty profound because like that's the very areas that God wants to come into our lives and sort of breathe life, you know?
Yeah. And I've seen it time and time and time again in my own journey and Ollie's journey. That's exactly it. Is when we get to that point of I have nothing more. It's when, I don't know, not breakthrough, but you see God moving. Yeah. It's like, and I always say, in my journey, it's been a case of living open-handed. It's like I try not to hold on to anything, because in our house, it's not the normal kind of experience of, you know, a mom and a dad and 2 kids. And, you know, so we kind of have to let go of that experience. And then something might happen and Ollie might regress. So you have to let go of your thought of where he should be, even relative to his peers at school. And what I've learned over the 12 years is living open-handed is, so that's when God comes. Like you're saying, it's at the very end of our fingertips almost. It's like that's where he comes and he can do whatever he needs to do. Yeah.
No, I mean, like, because I'm just thinking that's so challenging. Like, and again, I'm thinking back to that example of Ollie's. Like, I don't remember the last time I just went and held someone's hand and they would have said, I felt overcome by the presence of God. Well, because I would rely on speech. Yeah. And yet that's something that's difficult for Ollie. And it's almost like, well, God's like, oh, I'm not too phased about that. Let me just do it. I don't need the language. I'll just, yeah.
So he uses us and he uses our kids. And I think if there's a message of hope that we can give parents watching is look out for the things that go unseen, and you have to let go of how you think life should be, and you'll see God working in your kids. I get admonished. My sister always says, don't call them kids because those are baby goats.
Children.
You'll see God working in your children.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, you've been a part of our kind of community, our closer knit community for a while. How have you seen Ollie in the church environment? Because I've had friends who have children on the spectrum and they've been asked to leave church because they're disruptive,
Sure.
which can be really hurtful for the parents, because the very place that they're supposed to be going
like
for community, for love, for support is the place that's going, we actually don't have space for you. I know Ollie can be disruptive. A couple of Sundays ago, he tried to get up and greet Mark in the middle of a sermon, which was less than ideal. But how do you think we can, as churches, incorporate a more adaptive way of dealing with kids that are not neurotypical?
No, it's such a good question. I mean, I think, and this is across every facet of humanity ever, is that like humans just have so little space for difference. It's
true.
I mean, it's probably like one of the weakest things about like being a human, and I just think like we hold on to stuff way too tightly and way too closely. We have opinions about so many things that we have actually like very little knowledge of, that kind of a thing, But I suppose in particular to that, as I just think is that like, if your number one sort of model for church is family, like what is even the problem? You know what I mean? And if that's firstly a child of God, secondly in our little church family, a child of our church. I mean, but of course that's on paper, and then when when it happens, like people are incredibly I suppose naive, uninformed, and like that's the reaction comes from that point, as opposed to any form of understanding towards it. You know what I mean? And I think even for me, but I've always seen it over Ollie, is that thing of like if every human has this possibility to be a conduit of God's presence, of like that lens, just like every single human that comes into our community has the presence of God with them. It's almost like the more that what's Psalm 131? No, not 131. One of somewhere around there is that when brothers dwell in unity, it's like anointing oil that flows down Aaron's beard. Just that thing of like God saying like, hey, where there's unity, I will literally command a blessing. And I've seen that as like our community has rallied around Ollie 100%. In unity. There's such a blessing over it, for all of us. And I think Ollie challenges so many people with the freedom in which he worships, his joy, I think you would have to be a really hard-headed, difficult human to walk into church and be like, oh my goodness, that doesn't give me so much life. I'm so challenged. I'm so like sort of brought to tears to just see the joy at which Ollie encounters God,
It's such a, for parents, often, like Ari and I, we worry that Ollie can be more distracting than encouraging. So it's so exciting to hear that. And the older he gets, the taller he gets. And so the more you can see his little head on the screen. And so sometimes you're like, okay, we hope he's not a distraction.
No, not at all.
But that's cool to hear. Do you have any scriptures or stories from the Bible that we could use to encourage parents to see hope or understand how God can work through our kids rather than thinking we need someone to come and work with our kids, if that makes sense.
I mean, one of the things I was actually listening to something the other day, and it was actually Francis Chan, and he spoke about this idea from Romans 5:5, where it says like, God through his Spirit pours out his love into our hearts. And quite literally, I think so much of faith involves the surpassing of your mind. Like, I mean, I know a big thing for me in my coming to God was like, I actually had to lay down my thoughts.
Yeah.
Like
Your
I had so many
brain.
questions, so much, so many questions about God and coming to him that I wanted answers for. And when I realized, oh, God's not here to answer all of my questions, he's here on his terms. And I actually had to lay that thing down. I think that was incredibly hard and yet so beautiful for me as an individual. And that process to me of sort of even that idea of like that God is spirit, not flesh. So much about what we do is this thing of like, that's the wrestle we're in, spirit and flesh. And I wonder, this is just a thought, I hope it's a free space for that, but I wonder how much someone who is neurodivergent or whatever it may be, some form of limitedness or difficulty or whatever, is like that thing has enabled them to come to the end of the journey of flesh sooner than a completely, whatever you would want to call it, able-bodied person or whatever it might be. It's almost like that process is maybe somewhat I don't know what to be, fast forward. I don't even have
like
the right language for it.
Circumvented,
where actually there's like this pureness at which we come to God in childlikeness or whatever it may be, where it's actually just like, I don't have such a battle with flesh. And I rely on the goodness and the graciousness of God that actually he surpasses all of that, you know?
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think I do see that in Ollie. Like we were saying earlier, there's that whole idea of the social norms and obviously we want him to operate in society with some social norms, but when he is encountering people, he loves wholeheartedly. When he's moving around the church on a Sunday, holding people's hands or hugging people, I think he's self-appointed himself as the welcome team now. I see him walking around, shaking everybody's...
Ministry.
Exactly.
That's what's crazy. That's ministry,
I think for me, being a part of a community that's encouraged us to let him be more him and allow him to explore God, explore himself in God and within the community, has allowed us to see, like I said earlier, that he is not, or he doesn't need to be a recipient of the mission work, but he can actually be an active participant in it. And I think that's something that our church does really well. I think we are unique. I think there are many local churches who don't have a grid for it. So I'm very grateful to the leadership of our church for their love and acceptance of Ollie. But yeah, I think, as we said earlier, it is for parents to, maybe it's about asking not the right question, but different questions. So instead of saying, did God create me like this? It's about settling on, what can God do through this? I don't know. What do you think? I don't know.
No, well, it's one of the things that definitely, as I was thinking about this, that I thought to myself, well, we exist sort of, I would say like sort of in three things, which one is physical, one is mental, another one is spiritual. And so often, or should I rather say, how often in the Gospels does God do something in the physical that represents something of what he's doing in the spiritual?
So good.
And every single time his major concern, of which he's using that to prove the point, is the spiritual. So, for example, one of my favorite stories, I think it's in Mark 2, is when Jesus heals the paralyzed man that is lowered through the roof by his friends.
Yes.
He says, he says to him, son, you're seeing their faith, son, your sins are forgiven. And of course, the Pharisees, you can imagine everyone like, how dare you? Only God can say that. And then he has that really beautiful line, in order that you may know that the Son of Man has all authority. Or he says to them first, which is harder? To say, son, your sins are forgiven, or get up and walk. And of course, for anyone in the room, we all know which is the greater, but the one that's harder is to say, get up and walk, because it would need some form of proof in response to that. But Jesus' concern in that moment is that your sins are forgiven. And then he demonstrates his authority over that through his authority over the physical. But undoubtedly in that story, his thing is spiritually, like, hey, are you spiritually whole? And so I think for me, that's definitely one of the other challenges, and I don't even know if this at all answers your question, but Jesus is concerned with, and God is concerned with, spiritual wholeness. And I think we as humans, again, operating flesh, we are concerned with physical wholeness. And we obsess about that. And yet how much of our physical wholeness, be it intellectual or physical, or is actually a barrier between us and God. Our human capabilities to do stuff, our ability is the very thing we lean on, our strengths, our giftings, is everything. If we don't harness those things well, it's like that becomes a barrier between us and God. And yet the thing that he's after is our spirits, and a yielded spirit. Again, coming back to the other point of how much of it is our flesh that gets in the way of that journey of knowing God, you know?
And so limiting ourselves to thinking about ableness and ability and cognition and physicality is only a small part of what we should be focusing on with our kids, which is the spiritual wholeness and health.
And parents who would be again, hypothetically, so happy to have a kid out there who is extremely spiritually disabled, as in like they might have huge pride or greed, and we're happy to churn out humans
like that,
image bearers of God, to go into society, and yet they are severely spiritually disabled. You know, versus in this case, the obvious flip of someone who might literally be physically disabled in one way or another. Or should we rather say differently abled?
Fair enough.
And yet there's maybe this beautiful purity to their spirit. It's an interesting concept. It's so
challenging.
It's not an answer, but it's challenging, you know?
It is so challenging. I think that for me has been the most challenging thing, is when we're thinking about this whole journey is about, even as a mom of a special needs or neurodiverse, or I don't actually know what the right term is, I've got to say. I've walked the journey for almost 12 years and it's changed so many times. But as Ollie's mom, there are times when I can get caught up in the physical or cognitive impairments and forget about the purity and the spiritual wholeness. And then when we come full circle and we have conversations like this, like today, and you think, actually, the way he encounters life, the way he encounters people, the way he encounters God, the way he goes about and lives his life, I'm actually kind of jealous of it.
And it comes back to the repeated pattern we see in Scripture, which is this thing of humans on outward appearance and God. I'm thinking of the story of David. He's like, I'm after their heart. And I think that's probably the difficult thing is that, like, and probably that's where the earthly thing, which is I suppose where we started the podcast idea, comes of, like, because there's that unknowingness as to where a kid who's neurodiverse is, because of the inability maybe to express that. You, maybe as a mother you have questions of, like, well, what is Ollie's relationship with God? Well, very difficult to tell. Except by the fruits. If it says judge a tree by its fruits, well, the fruits of Ollie's life is God's presence manifest. And then, if we're told to judge it by that, incredible.
That's like a nice tick there.
The parenting.
No, it has nothing to do with my parenting. I can promise you that. I think, full circle is like, we started out saying, did God create or does God create people with disabilities? And then there's 100 scriptures where, like, we can go about it. It's like, for I know the plans I have for you. You knitted together in your mother's womb. You created whole. And, then we sit, I'm just thinking about that new mom sitting in the delivery room. Maybe she's just got the diagnosis, or a mom of a toddler age 3 who's just got that diagnosis. And it is so hard to reconcile back those scriptures with this current experience of the physicality and the concern of what this all means for us. But I think where we've landed in, like, on our rabbit hole type discussion, which I knew it would be, is that the plans and the purposes we don't necessarily always understand. Because we are limited in maybe our focus on the physicality or the cognitive or mental side. But actually, when you take that lens off and you are looking at the ways in which God uses our kids, or the way they encounter life, or the way they encounter people, you can see the beauty of their life and the fruit of their life. And so that kind of, like, is that a good summary of where we landed?
Very good.
Okay. And then I think the other thing is, this is the hard one. So God never promised us an easy life. Never says in the Bible, I'm going to create you, you're going to have a perfect life, and then you die and you come meet me in heaven. But I think what I've also learned, and maybe this is also a parent thing, and certainly in your story, I'm sure, is that in those moments where we are living in doubt, it's like you have to turn back to him and you have to look and see his face. And when we look at his face, we see the reflection of what his plans and purposes are for us, and we can catch maybe a little glimpse of what he's thinking, not what we're thinking.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, like, and again, I don't have a theology for this, just to be super clear, but I don't come across a single human I meet or a single Bible story I read where something of the journey or your journey with God doesn't include some form of wilderness exodus-y type of a story to it, where we get taken through that, and we have all different things for that. Like, what do we call it? Is that, like, we call it a desert place, we call it, and yet there's something about it in that space where God does something. And I don't have any fancy things for it other than there's something about the way of God that revolves dying to yourself.
Yes.
I mean, quite literally, he does it to bring new life.
Yes.
It's a concept he seems to, and it's in that wilderness space that happens, you know. And I suppose that's what's interesting, is that's almost like the journey potentially of a parent or a loved one, or I mean, even if I bring it a little bit closer to home, my niece is somewhere on the spectrum. She's still at that age where they're trying to work out exactly what it is she's going for. And I'm seeing my sister go through a bit of that wilderness of, like, God, what are you doing? And yet it's in that space that God is planting seeds, doing stuff both for her and her child.
100%.
And that process, we all don't like it.
No,
in
it's
our
refining.
Lives. It's that very thing, and we don't like it. We're not good at it as humans, because it's that space where we're out of control, where we're forced to depend, to turn to Jesus' face and just be like, okay, this is exactly what faith is. Though I do not see, I'm thinking of Hebrews 11, that, like, out of what I don't see, I believe that you're making something, you know.
Yeah.
And even that idea of, in Hebrews 11, when it recommends all the heroes of the faith, it comes to that part where it says, like, these people died without seeing the fullness of the promises of God. And we've chatted about this, like, there's been so many promises over Ollie's life, over your life, that have involved him as he is in this created state. Not a heavenly Ollie. And yet at the same time, what we coming back to that, like, when will we see it? Is this it? You know, I don't know. Back at square one.
It does kind of feel a bit like a spider's web, this kind of whole idea. And I don't think we will settle on a final answer, did God create me like this or not? But I love that analogy of the Exodus journey, like through the sea, because that often does feel like the special needs parenting journeys. Like you've got Pharaoh chasing you down, which is like, it could be regression, it could be diagnosis, it could be another complication, and then you at the sea and you're like, okay, God, I don't know.
Yeah, what do I more impossibility in front of you?
What does it mean? What does it mean for the future? Do I need to do this? Do I need to do that? And so you've got all of this stuff on top of you, and it's at that moment where you turn and you go, I know that you will provide for me in this state, that the sea parts basically. And you're like, oh, okay, I can see just a little bit in front of me to be able to make the next right decision or the next right step. Again, it's like taking you to the very end.
Yeah.
That is literally the culmination of special needs parenting. And we have it easy. I mean, I'm totally aware that a Down syndrome diagnosis is one of, I mean, I'm going to say this, maybe the comments will tell me otherwise, but in terms of neurodiversity or, hardships, Down syndrome is one of the easier ones. So I'm well aware of that, but I feel like God has taken me to the very end and then brought me back and then taken me to the very end, and then he's made me walk on water a number of times.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And so, but in saying all of that, at the end of the day, it's about going, I know you have plans and you have purposes for him, and we have to settle in on that and not looking back on what is the cause. Yeah.
And that was actually one of the questions I thought of as like undoubtedly more so than most for you. What have some of the lessons you've learned about God looking at Ollie's life?
You are turning the tables on me.
I am, eh?
Oh, yeah, there have been so many lessons. So I think I've learned a lot about myself. I've learned that I'm a fighter. Although I think my husband would tell you that he knew that about me already.
He could have told us that.
Yeah, he could have. I mean, if he was sitting here, he'd be rolling his eyes. But what I've learned about God is, and I think I say this to a lot of my clients in the coaching space, if they are believers, is that even when you feel like God is as far away as you think he is, he never ever leaves you. He never forsakes you. He is always close. I mean, you can go to the depths of the ocean, to the top of the mountain, you can go wherever. He is always there, and he is always waiting to hear. I've learned that he's never tired of hearing my stories. There have been nights, there have been days where I've paced around this very room or in the kitchen or down the passage, and he never ever tires of listening to me and providing me with the support I need, whether it be church or friends or a therapist to come alongside us just at the right moment. Just at the right moment. I've learned that he can use anybody at any time. Like you said, there have been so many moments that people have come to me and said to me, I needed something from God, and Ollie was there, and I felt it in that moment, that manifest presence, I have learned that he is faithful and he is steady and he is consistent, even in my inconsistency. So whether I have wandered away from him or whether I feel like we are very close, his steadfastness and his consistency has been something that I've clung to. I know it sounds like such a silly thing to say because we know God is consistent. Like God is who he says he is.
But we have to learn it.
Yeah, we do. I think, it has been an incredible journey watching Ollie grow up and just experiencing who God is and what that means for us as a family. And I think one of the funniest stories was I was sitting with him at bedtime the one night, and I said to him, we were reading a story. I don't even think it was a Bible story. He's got a fascination with, at that point, it was any Julia Donaldson book. So Room on the Broom or anything like that. And I said to him, Ollie, is there an angel in the room? And he was like, yeah. And he points to the corner of the room. And I was like, oh, amazing. And I said, what's the angel's name? And he looked me dead in the eyes and he said, Bob. And I was like, cool. Hi, Bob.
Good old Hebrew name.
Yeah. I think it's just that openness to experience. Have you read the book The Veil?
I'm trying to think, what's it about?
So it's this, I think his name is Brandon, and he talks about how he can interact with, or he can physically see the supernatural. And it's quite a challenging book because, you know, it's not something that I engage with regularly.
Yes.
But after reading that book, I realized how Ollie engages with God and with angels and all of that very differently to the way that I do.
Yeah.
I don't have the societal norms of going, oh, angels, no, that's not a thing.
Yes,
You know, or the spiritual realm, oh, no, let's not talk about that. That's a bit uncomfortable for a lot of people. He just goes about it, and he sees, I'm sure he sees angels.
It's part of his everyday.
He sees Bob quite a lot, apparently. But yeah, the learning to experience God in a more visceral way, I think, has been my biggest learning over the last 12 years. Whether that be through pain of the diagnosis or pain through watching him go through multiple procedures, going in under anesthetic or get sick. I've never ever felt like God has turned his face from us. And that, I think, is a huge thing to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Does that answer your question?
A little bit, yes.
A little bit.
No, it's good.
Do you want to go deeper?
So, well, funny enough that you said one of the things that I did end up reading this week was, I forget the guy's name, but he's sort of an activist from America. He actually has Down syndrome himself.
Oh, wow.
And he sort of speaks a lot about that. But one of the things that he was saying is that a Harvard-based study shows that families with a family member who has Down syndrome are generally happier and generally have more joy.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a worldly study going on pretty hard facts of percentages and stuff. And it's saying like, hey, statistics show that families with a member of the family who has Down syndrome are more likely or happier.
Yeah.
I mean, no one would guess that.
No.
And yet at the same time, when you read it or whatever, you're like, I'm not surprised on one level, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that we stand on in this house is the joy of the Lord is my strength. And it has come through in a multiple of different ways. And I'm still trying to actually come to grips with really what it means. But I think it doesn't surprise me that people who have a family member with Down syndrome, whether it be, you know, close or an extended family member, that joy, it's just because that's how, for the most part, they experience life. I mean, there are days, you've seen him, he can be grumpy. He can be very grumpy.
When he wants chocolate milkshake.
Or his raisins if worship is taking too long.
Bribe him with knickknacks.
100%. But also, I think, is there like a closing message that you would like to leave for therapists, family members, parents, or even, you know, adults who are neurodivergent? Is there anything that like...
I'm trying to think. I suppose one thing I think of that Galatians 5 is about the and it's quite interesting because it's fruit of the Spirit, not fruits. Love, peace, patience, joy, self-control, all of that. And I was thinking like we live in a world that so wants to chase sort of like the what would I how would I explain it? Almost like the flashy stuff of God, you know, like healings and you know, anything that's almost like has an element of theatricalness to it. And yet so often I think to myself, if we lived in a society that craved the fruits of the Spirit as much as the gifts of the Spirit, what would we actually look like as a society? Because even our desires for the gifts of the Spirit can often be a little bit, if we're brutally honest, somewhat self-indulged, whereas the fruit of the Spirit is not actually so glamorous, you know.
Yeah.
And definitely one of the things that I think I've been challenged by Ollie is there's a pureness towards his arguably even pursuit, or at least his display of the fruits of the Spirit, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there's something so pure about that, on which I think there's multitudes to learn from it. And even if I think about it in my own life, is that like, yes, obviously we want to see the gifts of the Spirit in our lives, but what we really, really want to see is this fruits of the Spirit in our life. And that is, in my very limited understanding of things, a more noble, a more holy, a more beautiful pursuit of things, you know. And I suppose even for me to say, as someone in our community, the beauty of seeing Ollie challenges me in that, and I think that's something so wonderful.
Thank you. That's really amazing. So again, it rests back on this: we don't need to view people who are neurodiverse as somebody who is a recipient of the church's love, but somebody that we can actually look to and go, that purity, that pursuit, that way you engage with people or God or whatever is actually challenging to me, and I can actually learn something from you, which is flipping the narrative on its head, actually, which is a beautiful thing. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
Thank you for coming. Cool.
Perfect.
Hi, thanks for watching this week's episode of Unlocking Hope. If you want to find out more about me, you can see my socials on screen or my website in the comments below. And if you're looking for a way to give back into a community, you can check out Kanisa Developmental Center. Their details are also below, and it's a great way to give back into the community.